perceived constraints have been a huge advantage to us because we had to get very scrappy with the money that came in and kind of think outside of the box on a few of these things. And I think it's improved the product, it's improved the technology.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Next Big Thing HQ, where we interview founders and showcase startups raising capital. Today, we have a visionary entrepreneur, one who's tackling one of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time. Our guest is leading the charge on developing innovative solutions to urban water management, addressing issues that affect us all, but often go unnoticed until it's too late. Greg Johnson, co-founder and CEO of AquiPor's. Welcome on the pod.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Connor.
Well, and Greg, I'm excited to talk to you and discuss how AquiPor's is revolutionizing the way we manage stormwater and paving the way for more sustainable cities. But full disclaimer, I'm not an expert and not that knowledgeable in the water management world. So can you start by explaining some of the specific problems that AquiPor's is trying to tackle when it comes to stormwater management?
Certainly. Stormwater runoff pollution specifically, I think it's a growing problem in cities, and it's a problem that's not getting as much attention, I think, as it deserves. We understand stormwater runoff pollution, I think, when you get a flash rain event and there's like urban flooding. And I think that's when it's most kind of in people's faces. But there's really a combination of three main factors that are really stressing the freshwater security in cities. And I think the first piece of it is we know in certain areas, really everywhere, we're getting more extreme type weather events. And this can mean prolonged periods of drought where it's extreme drought. And then suddenly, you get this mass, very quick, flashy rain event. So, extreme weather. And then on the second tier, we're kind of dealing with outdated water infrastructure in most cities. I know like in the Northeast, some of these cities are built on what are called combined sewer systems. So it takes stormwater, runoff pollution, wastewater, and raw sewage all in the same system. And some of these systems were built over 100 years ago. And then really the third factor is the fact that, we've urbanized in our cities, which we've, needed to. As you develop cities, there's a lot of impervious surface area, streets, sidewalks, even rooftops, alleyways, parking lots where they're impervious to rain. And so when it falls, obviously that creates runoff. And so these three factors have kind of combined and caused a pretty big issue to where I think the U.S. cities are estimated to discharge something like 10 trillion gallons of polluted runoff, wastewater, and sewage into clean waterways every single year.
And that's going into what? Like the ocean, ponds?
Yep. Ocean bays, rivers, lakes, wherever those systems are engineered to discharge into. And so, that's obviously a big problem for, marine life and aquatic health and all those things. But also the thing that a lot of people don't realize is when you have these events and you're not getting rain back into the ground, you're not recharging groundwater or recharging our aquifers. And in the US, I think 90% of all the water we consume comes from groundwater. And so when you're depleting these assets, it's not sustainable in the long term. So really what we're trying to solve is helping get water back into the ground, recharge aquifers, and then also deal with the stormwater runoff pollution issue.
That makes sense. And how are you going about solving that problem?
Kind of in a multitude of ways. I think, what we market the most is this proprietary porous concrete technology that we've developed. And it's a precast, concrete technology that can take the place in certain areas of, say surface areas in cities. So asphalt, concrete, things like this, where you can implement our technology within existing infrastructure to, get rainwater back into the ground. And so that's the tip of the spear for us. And then we have some other proprietary sort of engineering technologies that can take cleaned gray water from treatment plants, run it back through the piping grid in cities and recharge aquifers.
Instead of kind of going into, let's say, the ocean where it becomes almost impossible to then clean it up and reuse it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So porous concrete, that's not a relatively new technology. It's been around for a while, but you figured out how to innovate it so it's significantly better than the porous concrete in the past. So can you talk a little bit about the innovations and the advancements you've made in the porous technology and the porous concrete realm in order to mass produce it so that it can be used on a city sidewalk?
Yeah, so you're right. Pervious concrete, porous asphalt, different permeable paving technologies have been around for decades, and they're great in theory because, again, we've always thought that the best way, I think, to manage stormwater on site is to do it with a permeable surface that can also serve as, usable space you can walk on, park on, drive on, but it still manages stormwater. The problem with those past technologies, they rely on very large voids throughout the material to get water through them, which is fine. But the problem is there's a lot of, pollutants and particulate matter in stormwater in cities. And so these systems get clogged up very quickly. And what also you run into with some of these technologies is their durability. So they're not super strong over time. And, what we've done at AquiPor, we're very familiar with those incumbent technologies and what's been out there. And we don't even want to, I know this sounds weird, but we don't even want to compete with them. I don't even think we want to be in that realm. What we're kind of positioning our product as is a hardscape filter. And the reason I say that is because it's such a different technology. So it's permeable, it's very permeable, can get, vast amounts of stormwater through it, but it also has submicron porosity. So the pore size is so small that it will filter onto the surface the vast majority of particulate matter, pollutants, total suspended solids, all these things that are known to clog up those other systems. And so you don't need to necessarily pave a whole street with our product. I think you use it as part of an engineered design in very specific areas to filter stormwater.
That's all. So in some aspects, it could be a form of kind of a new grate, something, a form of the sewer system. And it kind of goes back to the mission of getting clean water back into the ground because you're filtering out. So the pollutants aren't going back into the ground. They're staying out the top layer and the filtered layer. So you're getting clean water back into the ground. So we'll constantly have that supply. And concrete obviously is all around us. I mean, it seems like I can't look at something that doesn't have concrete. So you're not necessarily replacing that, but it's figuring out how to use that in order to complete the mission of continuing to manage clean water and get it back into the ground, as well as avoid the flash floods.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Concrete's very useful. We need concrete. So yes, our mission is really to augment existing infrastructure to help manage stormwater on site, mitigate urban flooding, and do things of that nature.
That's awesome. Now, I saw in your StartEngine campaign, you are raising on StartEngine. So you're raising out Reg CF, which means anyone accredited or non-accredited can invest in AquiPor. But in there, you had some stats, right? More or less comparing what AquiPor is doing with the concrete compared to traditional concrete. Do you mind sharing some of those stats?
No, certainly. So again, very different technology. Our underlying technology that makes our porous concrete is actually a chemically bonded, it's kind of a metal-based concrete technology. And the easiest way to put it, or the easiest way to understand, the big difference between our concrete and normal concrete is we don't use any Portland cement in the mix. So Portland cement is like one of the main binders that makes concrete, set up and cure and get its strength and its hardness. Portland cement also, it's pretty well stated that it's responsible for something like 8% of all CO2 emissions in the world globally. And so it takes a hideous amount of energy and it blows off a lot of CO2 when it's produced. We don't use any Portland cement. Our assemblage is basically a combination of industrial minerals, some water, and then it's a liquid that we basically call our catalyst that brings the material together. And then the last step is some light heating that then facilitates the permeability throughout our product. So it pours just like concrete. You mix it just like normal concrete, but very different technology.
That's awesome. And then putting on the investor hat, I saw you do have some patents pending. So is this one of the patents pending for AquiPor?
It is. So AquiPor has rights from our inventor to these technologies, and actually the concrete patent is now approved, and so that's huge news for us. That was a kind of a big deal because obviously when we're going out into some pretty large industries and there's big incumbents, that layer of protection was something that was obviously super important to us. And so now that patent's approved, we have rights, to use that technology for all things porous and permeable and water related.
That's awesome. And then can you talk a little bit about the business model and your go-to-market strategy? Because I would imagine you're dealing with cities aren't known for being very fast. So kind of what's the strategy of getting cities to start adopting your product?
So really great question. This is the big question for us because we've gone back and forth. And in my past history, a previous startup we actually had the model, and we didn't own the technology. We were basically like a middleman for this pretty interesting pervious paver. It was a clay-based paver we were importing from overseas. And we went the route of being this new, better sort of permeable paver.
Yeah.
And that's a very tough business because it's very low margin. Again, you're dealing with cities and they're pretty path dependent. They move slowly, long sales cycles. And so what we learned from that was AquiPor we do not want to be just a vendor of a new product. Like that is not what we're becoming. So what we're doing is building the engineering capabilities to basically be like a design, build, engineering, procurement, construction entity that goes out, secures projects on our own, and then oversees the whole project from start to finish, procuring the material, making sure, quality control is totally, up to speed and everything's looking good, obviously in our permeable concrete, but then also overseeing the design and the engineering. So the go-to-market strategy really is to find a first developer or two in the private sector that has some of these water issues. We all know, in certain regions especially, there are big water issues. Being able to manage stormwater on site is kind of top of mind for every developer that we've talked to. But finding those guys and then going out and doing those first couple projects and using that pull strategy to show cities like we can do this, and we have the data and the calcs to show them, how much water we could save a city based on how much, say we get 2 miles of a sidewalk system installed in LA County, we can show exactly what that would mean. But use those first sort of private projects as a pull strategy then to get cities on board.
So in a way, are you trying to target maybe neighborhood developers to kind of get that proof of concept to really show the cities, hey, look at this overwhelming evidence that we have showing that our product not only works, but works really well and people love it, and that we have now more and more private developers constantly coming to us. And I'm assuming having this kind of being in charge of your own project aspect, it allows you to make sure to provide that quality assurance so that your product is the highest quality every single time you deliver it. When you're a vendor, you have less control over the quality because you don't know what the construction workers, what the other company on the end is going to be using with your product.
That's exactly right. Yep, you nailed it. That's the thought process for us.
So when was this pivot? And then when you were weighing the options, this might be more of a kind of technical question, but I kind of went down the rabbit hole. What were some of the trade-offs you were debating? Because obviously this was a big decision, switching the business model a little bit. So can you walk me through kind of the trade-offs and why you landed on going this route?
Certainly. You're asking really good questions, by the way. These are part and parcel to, conversations that we have ongoing all the time. So I think the first thing was that past business experience where, we're getting projects and we're generating revenue, but the margins were just they were so small, and it was always a race to the bottom. Do you have a cheaper product? Okay, so your product's a little bit better. We don't want to pay that much more for it though. And so, that's fine if you're, in terms of economies of scale, you can move as much material in your manufacturing in, 30 states or something. And you're at that level. For us as a startup, we're not going to be there, for a couple of years at least. And I think some learnings from that. And then we have an advisor that he's an engineer, professional engineer, worked for Bloor Corp, like some very big EPCM companies. And he knows how that model works. And he basically has said, we have these very unique technologies and you don't want to minimize them by suddenly, you just have a new, better permeable paver that people are just going to pay a little bit more from or a little bit more for. So we've layered on these engineering technologies that we now have patents on that I think can overlay capital and actually overlay revenue streams for these actual projects. Not to get confusing, but one of our patents, we can thread broadband, power. There's different things that we can do within the sidewalk system.
Really?
And what's called a utilidor, that is ours. Like that's our proprietary technology. And so once we get into the neighborhood and start solving the water thing, there's a multitude of utility revenues that we can actually access by doing this system. And so I'm going on and on. I guess the pivot, we've had this in our mind for a long time, but the pivot point was just how do we make this the most impactful for communities?
Yeah.
Use stormwater management as the anchor to get in there. And then there's a bunch of other things that we can do, I think, to bring like inherently green infrastructure to communities. So
right now, what I'm envisioning in the future is that using your technology and like the infrastructure you can lay down in these neighborhoods. Let's say you get a contract with a developer who wants to build a new neighborhood. There's not going to be any telephone poles because they can go underneath the infrastructure, right? While also allowing the clean water to get back into the ground. There's not going to be any transformers sitting in people's yards because that can be placed underneath the infrastructure. So in a way, it went from the vision of figuring out how to sell good permeable concrete that allows water to get back into the ground to figuring out how to create this infrastructure to make clean neighborhoods, to make beautiful neighborhoods, right? Going forward in the future. And that's where the puck is going to go. That's
exactly right. You nailed it. And what's funny though, is it all goes back to the porous concrete though, because it's a very important part of our system.
Yeah.
So this engineered technology we have that takes gray water from treatment plants back through cities to recharge groundwater. In order to do that, we need to mitigate the amount of stormwater going to the plant. And so it still all starts with being able to, when you get these big rain events, we need to manage those on site, get that water back into the ground, and then because you don't want these huge volumes of polluted runoff going, and then you have the whole discharge problem out to, rivers and oceans. You want to be able to manage that on first impact and then get the treated gray water back through the system.
Makes sense. And at the end of the day, that is the root of the problem, right? So you can solve the problem as many ways as you want before, but if you don't solve the root, the problem is still going to be there. So you're figuring out how to actually tackle it. Now, you mentioned a little bit about your past startup and your past life, but can you tell us a little bit more about the story behind AquiPor, how it started?
Sure. It leads back to that first story where my co-founder Kevin and I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. He was at college and he became friends with a kid that was, he was at WSU from overseas. He was from China. And I was kind of dabbling in real estate development at the time. We saw there was a big issue. I kept seeing it even back then. There was an issue that developers had in terms of putting in stormwater facilities to manage stormwater on their site that they were going to develop. And so the solutions at hand were, they were few and far between. They took up a lot of usable space. They were expensive. And so it kept pointing back to, again, permeable pavement and being able to manage stormwater with a paved surface. And so at the same time, just weird coincidence, this kid Kevin was friends with, his family, they were partners. So they owned part of a refractory business in China. And one of the products they were making was this sort of micro-porous paver that they would use in China to manage standing water. And so I was like, Kevin, have him send a sample or two over. And he did, and we poured water on it, and we were like blown away. And we both looked at each other and we're like, there's a market for that here. And so just being naive and ambitious, we went over there, found ourselves in this like distribution agreement, and we started importing it. We did all the legwork in terms of finding out like what standards, what US ASTM standards had to be met here. We got all that testing done, did a bunch of literally boots on the ground, knocking on civil engineering firms and landscape architecture firm doors, got a bunch of like customer discovery done, ton of insights, and we started building that business. Again, we were super naive, and we didn't realize how hard that was going to be. And it turned out to be a really bad business because quality control was bad. It was expensive. You're shipping product halfway across the world. But what we did notice, we were getting on specs and people wanted a new product. They wanted something that was better than what was out there. And so around the same time, when we knew that business wasn't going to scale, we met our material scientist or our inventor. Yep. And he was working on a new concrete technology. He's a brilliant inventor. And we showed him what we were trying to do. And he's like, well, he takes the material and he kind of looked at it. And he's like, well, this isn't going to work long term because of, he had a litany of reasons. And he said, okay, can you prototype something for us? And he did. We were blown away. And we decided to come together and start AquiPor. And that's kind of, the beginning of everything for us.
It seems like green cities are the future, and that's the trend. There's more and more trends popping up, more and more support behind the green cities. I guess my question for you is, what trends excite you most about kind of the thought of green cities or the thought of green neighborhoods? What specific trends are you most excited about, both for yourself, for the mission, but also for AquiPor?
Well, I think there's this trend pointing toward sponge cities. I'm sure you maybe heard that term, where certain cities that have dealt with these urban flooding events continuously are starting to see that we need just more permeable space in cities. And so that's a trend that we're watching closely that I think, is important to us. I think it's going to benefit us in the future. And I do think that's the way that cities are going to go in the future as well, because you can keep spending, billions of dollars to build larger conveyance systems and larger underground combined sewer systems and tanks. But at some point, you're still going to outgrow those with the way cities are growing. And so cities are starting to understand that we definitely need a lot more permeable surface and green space in the urban environment. And I think that's a trend that, AquiPor is going to benefit from.
And I can relate. I live in New York City, and when it rains here, it pours. And when it pours here, it's really tough walking around it's tough walking around without coming back and your socks are just absolutely drenched and you feel like you just went swimming. So I see it firsthand all the time. My question to you is, concrete, you want to replace it, kind of, what do you do with it? And then where's the difference between kind of digging up concrete, not being able to use it, and then with AquiPor's solution, you can dig it up and reuse it, recycle it, right? I don't know, I forgot the term you used, but kind of mix it back together to make better solutions or different solutions. It's no longer getting thrown in a landfill.
Yeah, that's a key component too of our technology is once it's past its useful life, it's something that can be recycled and go back into new AquiPor product or other products. And also, we need to figure out when we get to market on our first few projects, how long, we've done testing, durability testing, but how long does this AquiPor material last in the wild, so to speak? And even if it's just a couple years, it's precast, it's easy, low cost to replace. And then once you replace it, again, recycling that product to go into new and different products is definitely something that is going to be part of our kind of closed loop manufacturing process. In terms of existing concrete, as long as it doesn't get landfilled, there's a lot of things you can do with recycled concrete still. And, I don't think that's as big of a worry. We could probably even use it in some of the stuff we're doing. So.
Well, that's good to know. Now, I want to swing back to raising on StartEngine. You are raising on StartEngine. So for the people investing in AquiPor, how's the capital going to be allocated?
Yeah. So we have raised just over 850 grand to date.
It's awesome. Congrats.
And thank you. It's been great. And I mean, I should take a moment too to thank everyone that's, supported us. We have investors that continue to reinvest, and new investors, and the feedback, the insight, the comments we get from folks that give us new ideas. And it's been incredible. And we're very thankful to have the investment community that we have. So I just want to say that first and foremost. But in terms of allocating the capital, it's really all gone toward, at this point, R&D and kind of the last leg of R&D. You'd be amazed. And it seems like a lot of money to get, research and development done, but every single dollar that's really been allocated to getting the fine tune, like the nitty gritty stuff done, where a year ago, we thought we were there sort of with a commercial ready product. And then we get into the manufacturing plant and you have to work through, it seems like endless variables that are so tiny, but so important to our process and the heating. And we use a light acid sort of as our catalyst, fine tuning those mix designs. So it's really all gone toward that. We had a kind of a stretch goal for this that was going to go in and probably be project support for our first couple pilots. And maybe we still get there, but for now it's just been all heavy duty research and development, and also some market and customer discovery as well.
They talk a lot about that when it comes to product, getting to the 90% mark. That happens. That's I don't want to say easy, but very possible and realistic based off your expectations. But the last 10% is so incredibly tough and takes 100% more effort than the first 90% did, just because those fine details are the difference between a normal product and the product you want to serve that really changes the world. And, I think that goes to show like you're taking this very seriously and trying to get to that last 10% done, getting it done right.
You're so right. And it's funny. Yeah. Again, I mean, I go back and I look at even the last 18 months where we were certain we're there with commercial ready, product. And it was just a few slight tweaks and a few, iterations that we had to get to. And I'm actually glad it's gone through these paces, because, there were certain things where if you get a product out into the market, this is heavy civil construction, and you don't have those things dialed in, that's really tough to recover from. And, I look at, and these aren't direct competitors, but I do look at some companies in the green concrete space that have raised venture money, tens of millions of dollars. And we're kind of right in the same realm as they are in terms of technical readiness. And so that's the other thing that has actually been a big benefit. I don't want to call them capital constraints, but when you're crowdfunding, sometimes the money comes in a little slower over time. But those perceived constraints have been a huge advantage to us, because we had to get very scrappy with the money that came in and kind of think outside of the box on a few of these things. And I think it's improved the product, it's improved the technology. And again, it's given us more time to really think about the market and how we're going to enter it. So
I do think there's another important point to mention, where the people investing in you believe in your mission, believe in your product. So their interests are in line with your interests. Raising VC, I know there's plenty of really good VCs out there that are very much green friendly, right? They want a green world, but at the same time too, they're also in it to get a really, really good return in a very short amount of time. So I think that's also tough running a company, because you want to make sure the investors' interests are with your interests and they're all aligned. When you have those other voices that interests aren't with yours or the main mission, but maybe their own personal interests, then that's another constraint, another thing that takes away from your focus of accomplishing the goal. So
absolutely.
Real quick, so I always ask all the guests this: what's a book recommendation that you would offer, or you would recommend to me? Kind of like your favorite book that you love reading.
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I mean, 0 to 1. I know you probably get that all the time. That's a book I go back to. Peter Thiel's book. I've gone back to multiple times. I think that's a great book. I've been reading a lot more broadly lately, I think, and I'm just finishing the biography on Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
It's called King of Life, and that's been incredible. And what did I read before that? I can't even remember now.
I do want to say, talking about 0 to 1, what you're doing and how we talked about that pivot, right? You were originally, the original idea was much more of a commoditized business model where you're trading and it's highly competitive. So over time, the margins get smaller and smaller and smaller to what you're pivoting now. It's trying to attack a blue ocean market, right? And going that route where you're one of one, there's not really much competition because you're differentiated yourself so much from everyone else. And so, yeah, it's cool seeing that and seeing the decision process you made. And the Martin Luther King book, I feel like a lot of biographies I read, everything's all connected at the end of the day. And so connecting those dots and what he did and his frameworks, sure, that's a great book, and I'm going to have to give that a read.
Yeah.
Thank you for the recommendations.
I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah.
And last question, advice for aspiring entrepreneurs. What's some advice you'd give to someone who's young, aspiring entrepreneur, trying to, I guess, figure out what they want to do and how they want to go about it?
Well, I think the first bit of advice would be if you have kind of a burning, well, let's not even call it a burning desire. Let's say that there's an itch that you need to scratch. Then that's probably, if there's some pain point that you see in the world, in the market, that's probably a decent business to look at. And then I think obviously it always goes back to persistence. I mean, entrepreneurship is so hard. It is so difficult, and you have to be persistent, obviously. And I would say, take advice from everyone with a grain of salt, and take serious advice from people that have skin in your game. And that's one thing I had to learn early on is everyone, when you start out, you have this idea, you're super excited about it, and nobody cares about it to start, or they just tell you, every way, every reason it's not going to work. But then eventually you get into it and people take some interest, but only if you do it this way. So they'll have advice. This is an awesome idea. You should do this. And I've made that mistake of listening to that, and it takes you down a road that is not your ultimate vision. And so you just have to be super confident in your vision and not really let anyone knock you off of that. And then I think the last piece of it is, as you get into it, you really have to take care of your own psychology and your mental health. And I know, that's something that doesn't get talked about enough in the startup world, I think, is the amount of stress and pressure and outside noise. It can really wear on you. And I think as an entrepreneur, starting out, it's exciting. Then you get into the grind. It is so vitally important that you take care of, your mentals and your psychology and whatever that means for you. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Greg, I appreciate you coming on. Where can people reach out to you, find you if they have any questions about AquiPor, if they want to invest? Where can they ask a question?
Certainly. We are at AquiPor.com. That's our website. We are on StartEngine at startengine.com/AquiPor. We are on all of the platforms for the most part. We're on X, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I think just at AquiPor Tech. If anyone wants to reach out, just reach out to us at info@aquipor.com with any questions, feedback, anything. We're pretty responsive.
Greg, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you. And then to all the viewers, listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. Go check out AquiPor, raising on StartEngine. And you said the round is going to be closing July 22nd, probably?
Yep. Right around there.
Go check it out. Look at, give AquiPor a look and invest if you want a green future. So, Greg, thank you for coming on. To all the listeners and viewers out there, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Connor.
So long. Bye-bye.